Profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching.
Okay, we will continue our explanation of the Shurangama Sutra. In today's teaching on the Shurangama Sutra, the Buddha's 25 great disciples all received the Buddha's verification. At the same time, they also shared some of their different experiences of attaining enlightenment. Among the approximately 14 disciples we discussed previously, most of them talked about their own states of realization at that time. Most of them explained how they broke through to enlightenment. Perhaps a few of them did not mention it, but it should be based on their respective. For example, we previously covered the 5 sense faculties and the 6 consciousnesses. In that case, based on their own sense faculties or consciousnesses, they attained enlightenment. For some, we can find and see that in the process of their own descriptions, they clearly stated it was their own experience, but some did not explain it very clearly. However, generally speaking, they relied on this sense faculty or this consciousness, or relied on this primary element to achieve realization. This should also be clear. We have previously discussed the 5 sense faculties and the 6 consciousnesses. Among the 6 consciousnesses are the eye, ear, and nose consciousnesses. Yes, and we also talked about the 6 sense objects earlier. The 5 sense faculties plus the 6 sense objects make 11. Then adding the eye, ear, and nose consciousness to these 11, the 14 methods have already been covered. Now we move on to the latter ones among the 6 consciousnesses, the tongue, body, and mind consciousnesses. Today we will start by discussing these 3 of the 6 consciousnesses. Among the 25 disciples, the 15th disciple is Pūrṇa. He is Pūrṇa Maitreya Niputra. We also call him Man-ci-z. We have talked about his story before, right? So I won't introduce him here. Then Pūrṇa Maitreya Niputra stood up, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to him respectfully, "Ever since a time during the eons of the remote past, I have been able to speak with unimpeded eloquence. When I have explained suffering and emptiness, I have penetrated deeply into ultimate reality." He says here that Venerable Pūrṇa, in fact among the Buddha's disciples, is considered foremost in speaking the Dharma. He stood up from his cushion at that time, and after bowing at the Buddha's feet, he said to the Buddha, "Ever since a time during the eons of the remote past, for many eons, I have been able to speak with unimpeded eloquence. Regarding this eloquence, for instance, there is unimpeded eloquence in speaking, unimpeded phrasing, unimpeded meaning, unimpeded dharma, and unimpeded delight in speaking. Eloquence is also divided into several types, so he has had it since the remote eons of the past. His unimpeded eloquence is not just from this lifetime. It has been there for eons, since beginningless eons, including in the Zhejiang commentary on the Shurangama Sutra. It mentions he possessed unimpeded eloquence before 90 billion Buddhas. It is not just for 1 or 2 lifetimes. In the past we have seen in the histories of some individual panditas, it is said they served as panditas for 500 lifetimes. This includes Sakya Pandita. In our treasury of valid cognition, the final verse says that he became a wise one lifetime after lifetime. When some commentaries explain this, they say he was a pandita for 500 lifetimes. But as for Venerable Pūrṇa, it was not just for 500 lifetimes but for countless eons. Before many Buddhas he possessed unimpeded eloquence. With that he would proclaim the Dharma teachings of suffering, emptiness, impermanence, and selflessness. When explaining these principles, he penetrated deeply into ultimate reality. It was not just a superficial, simple explanation. Actually, the realization state of the speaker makes a huge difference in the content being spoken. If the speaker has not personally realized the profound meaning, the teachings they speak will only go so far. If this speaker's level of realization is very profound, then what they say will also be unfathomably deep. Therefore, the Dharma he taught at that time was exceptionally profound every single time. Moreover, he always brought the teaching to the ultimate reality of all phenomena. Indeed, I have been able to give subtle and wondrous instruction to the assembly in the hidden gateways, to the Dharma taught by as many thus come ones as there are sand grains in the river Ganges. In doing so I have become completely fearless, he said, not only for such a short period of time, but even for the profound and secret Dharma gateways of as many thus come ones as sand grains in the Ganges, including exoteric teachings and tantric teachings. The extensive and profound Dharma gateways, I have been able to give subtle and wondrous instruction on all these teachings without any fear whatsoever. Because when he speaks the Dharma to sentient beings, he understands their spiritual capacities. By understanding their capacities, they generally won't slander you. Inherently, the capacities of sentient beings vary greatly in quality. They are vastly different. For us ordinary people, if we are to teach them, it is indeed true that some individuals might be delighted, while others may not necessarily be pleased. However, for someone who truly understands the capacities of sentient beings, they teach according to those capacities. If they speak in accordance with the inclinations of sentient beings, then the sentient beings will be able to accept it. Therefore, in the process of speaking, they will not have any fear. Whether among the assembly or among different sentient beings, when explaining subtle, profound and detailed Dharma, there will absolutely be no fear at all. Knowing that I was endowed with great eloquence, the world-honored one instructed me to use the sound of my voice to propagate the Dharma. I followed the Buddha as his assistant in turning the wheel, and so it was that by means of the lion's roar I became an arhat. Therefore the world-honored one, having also discovered that my eloquence is unimpeded, thus, generally speaking, the world-honored one knows who among his followers possesses unimpeded eloquence. Whether we are Dharma masters or teaching assistants, we should also know if there are people among us with unimpeded eloquence. We should care for them. Sometimes perhaps I may not dare to excessively praise here, saying this person is great, that person is great. I dare not say that. Actually, if various conditions are met, for example, among our followers, to acknowledge who has unimpeded eloquence, or even if they haven't reached unimpeded, to recognize those who have studied quite well, it is necessary and worthy of praise. Without this, even though some people have great eloquence and are excellent, if the Dharma masters or gurus do not acknowledge them, others might not pay much attention to them. People have all sorts of feelings like jealousy. Their talents might not be discovered, so it is necessary. As for the Buddha, he fully understood and knew who was foremost in eloquence, foremost in speaking Dharma, or foremost in holding precepts. He completely understood and knew all of this. Because the Buddha knew of his great eloquence, he instructed him to use the sound of his voice, the wheel of sound, because he achieved realization through the tongue faculty, right? Attaining realization through the tongue faculty means the Buddha, through sound, validated him and spoke to him. When speaking, he instructed him to propagate the Dharma. So the Buddha guided him in various situations. Because his realization was extraordinary, he began to propagate it. And so, with the Buddha evaluating and praising him in this way, I followed the Buddha. He also appeared before various thus come ones, frequently assisting the Buddhas in turning the Dharma wheel. According to his own abilities, he complied with the Buddha and helped him turn the Dharma wheel. For this reason, by means of the lion's roar, he ultimately spoke the Dharma on various occasions. By speaking the Dharma, through this speaking, he became an arhat. Thus, any method we practice, in fact, can lead to realization. As long as one delves deeply into a single practice, it should work. For example, some have attained realization purely by teaching sutras, some have attained realization just by sweeping the floor. By relying on a specific skillful means, one can also attain realization. One shouldn't spend all day thinking about this, constantly changing from one method to another. In that case, your mind is indeed scattered, being fickle and changing your mind every day, switching from one thought to another constantly, just jumping back and forth. Whether it's relying on a spiritual friend or listening to the Mahayana and Hinayana teachings, your state of mind is very important. If you have chosen a path and there is a strong resonance and focus, then you should start working from that point. Some of our Dharma masters say, "I have been teaching the sutras for so many years now, it won't do if I don't attain enlightenment now. I must give up teaching the sutras and definitely go somewhere else." But like Venerable Pūrṇa, if he had given up and gone into retreat, he might not necessarily have awakened. He presented himself before different thus come ones and different spiritual friends, continuously focusing on expounding the sutras and speaking Dharma. Later, through this lion's roar, he attained the fruit of an arhat. So whether it is expounding sutras or speaking Dharma, it is indeed extremely important. Some people might say, if you don't do retreats and practice and simply rely on speaking and listening, you won't necessarily attain realization. However, as we saw earlier, some individuals have indeed achieved realization through hearing and through speaking, relying on your tongue faculty to attain realization. This means that your tongue faculty, as mentioned about the tongue faculty before, one function is tasting flavors, and another is speaking Dharma or talking. So when speaking without this tongue, realization would be impossible. But because you have a tongue, you have this capability. Having it, there is tongue consciousness. With tongue consciousness, one attains realization through such conditions. Therefore, for us sitting here, all the principles we have discussed so far, we basically possess them all, right? We have the 5 sense faculties mentioned earlier, and we also interact with the 6 sense objects. Among the 6 consciousnesses, eye, ear, nose, and tongue consciousnesses, we currently possess each of them. So let's observe. In the process of speaking Dharma, as you continue to speak, because the sound of his speaking Dharma is essentially connected to his mind, speaking this, the sound produced through the tongue faculty is related to one's own consciousness, and through these conditions one attains enlightenment. The world-honored one verified that my skill in speaking the Dharma was without peer. The Buddha has asked us how we broke through to enlightenment. I used the sound of Dharma to overcome adversaries and subdue demons, and I put an end to my outflows. This then is the best method. Then the Buddha personally verified Venerable Pūrṇa at that time, stating that within his teachings he was foremost in speaking the Dharma. Because he attained enlightenment during the process of speaking Dharma, he is certainly foremost in speaking Dharma. He became enlightened while continuing to speak. This is quite. We also very much hope to attain enlightenment while speaking. Otherwise, some other ways of enlightenment are also relatively difficult. Therefore, he is foremost in speaking Dharma. So if the Buddha asks, what was the cause of my perfect breakthrough to Bodhi? I use the sound of Dharma. For him, relying on the tongue faculty and tongue consciousness, he used the sound of Dharma to subdue demons and adversaries, to subdue all 4 demons. Regarding our demons, there is the demon of afflictions, the demon of the aggregates, the demon of death, and the heavenly demon. But through speaking Dharma, in fact all 4 of these demons can be destroyed, because in the process of speaking Dharma, your afflictions can be severed. Without speaking Dharma, there's no way. When speaking Dharma, if the afflictions are severed, attachment to the 5 aggregates can also disappear. Then at this time, by your speaking of Dharma, untimely death can also be eliminated. Moreover, during the process of your teaching, heavenly dragons, yakshas, and other non-human beings will not find any opportunity to harm you. Therefore, many aspects of the 4 demons are eliminated through speaking Dharma. I also hope that our Khenpos and Khenmo sitting here, as well as the Dharma masters, including our daily mutual tutoring, this can actually be called speaking Dharma. If one's intention keeps up, then speaking Dharma will distance you from the 4 demons throughout your life. This is also stated in many commentaries. If you speak the Dharma, you stay far from the 4 demons. I also have this feeling myself. Since arriving at Larungar, no matter what, when speaking Dharma, it seems as though many protecting forces emerge, so nothing adverse happens, but as soon as I go out, I become more concerned. Every time I went out, the 2 times I went out in the winter, I was prevented by them from going anywhere, and then had to stay in one place for almost half a year. That was in previous years. I don't know how it will be this year. So if one speaks the Dharma, perhaps there wouldn't be so many issues. Taking Venerable Pūrṇa as our role model, indeed, throughout one's lifetime, it is a very rare and precious opportunity. Speaking and hearing the Dharma are among all the merits. To speak the Mahayana Dharma and listen to the Mahayana Dharma should be the most meaningful. For this reason it eliminates all afflictions, such as greed, hatred, and delusion. For Venerable Pūrṇa, it was essentially this speaking of Dharma, or tongue consciousness. This should be the supreme cause for awakening to Bodhi. It is the best cause for perfect penetration. This was the 15th, the next one should be the 16th among the 25 disciples. Just now were the eye, ear, nose, and tongue consciousnesses. Now it is the body consciousness, attaining realization through the body's consciousness. This is Upāli. Upāli then stood up, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to him respectfully, "I was the one who accompanied the Buddha when he escaped the city and left his household. I was there to watch the thus come one, as he diligently practiced austerities for 6 years. I myself saw the thus come one subdue demons, bring under his influence the followers of wrong paths, and free himself from the outflows of worldly greed and desire." He speaks of Upāli here. Some commentaries mention that he is Channa, the charioteer from when the Buddha left home. It was him. Such explanations are found in the commentaries. However, this is not very obvious in the original sutra text. If he is Channa, there is slightly an issue regarding this character. It might be a bit difficult to interpret. But we can take a look at this later. This Upāli, he should be, regardless, looking at the later verses of the sutra, he is foremost in upholding the Vinaya regarding precepts. Of course, earlier we mentioned that Venerable Kashyapa is foremost in ascetic practices. This one is foremost in holding precepts, guarding them like his own eyes. Historically, within the Buddha's teachings, he was the best at upholding the precepts, so he stood up from his cushion, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, "I personally accompanied the Buddha, and then escaped from the royal city of Kapilavastu, the city of King Shuddhodana, and then manifested, leaving the household life. When leaving the household life, he said he personally saw the thus come one diligently practicing austerities by the Nayaranjana river for 6 years. After the 6 years of austerities, he later arrived at Bodhgaya, at the Vajra seat, and actualized the fruition of perfectly complete enlightenment. At that time he subdued all external and internal demons, all demonic obstacles. Among those demonic obstacles, the representative ones, youthful, lovely, and beautiful forms of various demons, were subdued. Also bring under his influence the followers of wrong paths. He subdued various followers of wrong paths, because at that time followers of wrong paths developed jealousy, and those wrong paths were also quite flourishing. Some of them tried to feed him poison, some unleashed intoxicated elephants, and others wielded various weapons, initiating attacks on the Buddha through various means, but none of it had any effect on him. Finally, he freed himself from the outflows of worldly greed and desire. Thus he was freed from all worldly greed and desires. From these outflows of greed, he attained liberation from all worldly outflows of greed. In this case, if he was Channa, Everyone knows that when Shakyamuni Buddha went out on excursions and saw the sights at the four gates, the suffering appearances of birth, aging, illness, and death, upon returning, he left the palace and his household. Since there was no other way, relying on the four heavenly kings, Channa drove the horse carriage up into the sky, passing over the city gates. Then they arrived at the stupa of purity, where his hair and beard spontaneously fell, or it is said the Buddha shaved his own hair. Then the remaining hair and the carriage were all given to Channa to take back. Later, King Shuddhodana couldn't bear it, so he sent 5 ministers along with Channa to go there and stay with the Buddha, so they could practice. During their practice, the 5 ministers later became the 5 bhikshus. As for Channa, he continuously followed along later as well. Thus, from a historical perspective, Channa should have been extremely respectful toward the Buddha. However, he also had some issues. Looking at the Vinaya Pitaka, this Channa had a severe habit of verbally abusing others. He was very arrogant himself. He even looked down on Shariputra and Maudgalyāyana. He thought, why should they be respected? They came from wrong paths. They used to study wrong paths, so he often disapproved of them. Later, while the Buddha was still alive, he did not attain realization. When the Buddha was leaving this world, the Buddha also told Venerable Ananda, saying, if Channa absolutely refuses to listen, you should temporarily cut off association with him. That might be better. Later, after the Buddha entered nirvana, after they temporarily cut off association with Channa, he developed a sense of fear from within his heart. Then, as he diligently practiced the Dharma, it seems that only under Ananda's guidance did he attain the fruit of an arhat. Therefore, interpreting this as Channa might be a bit, because here it says he had already attained the fruit of an arhat, and was foremost in upholding precepts. But in reality, Channa was one of the group of 6 bhikshus. He was quite mischievous and relatively difficult to guide, so for him to become foremost in upholding precepts seems a bit problematic, doesn't it? Regarding this aspect, you might need to look into it later. So how should we interpret it here? Actually here, although it seems as if this Channa is quite similar, he also often for one followed the Buddha, saw him leave home, saw his 6 years of austerities, and witnessed the phenomena of the Buddha's attainment. All of this he saw with his own eyes, but in fact if it refers to Venerable Upāli, we cannot exclude the possibility that he was also there at that time. Although he didn't follow closely alongside, it is very possible he observed the entire process completely. This is also possible. Of course, it seems that when Upāli became a monk, it was later on. His ordination should have happened later, after the Buddha attained enlightenment. He went there first. He previously worked specifically as a barber, and was also a servant in King Shuddhodana's household. Later, after he saw the Buddha leave home, he felt great faith. However, he felt that because of the nature of Indian society, where the 4 castes were very distinct, because of this, he felt that he was not qualified to become a monk. Later he asked the Buddha, and the Buddha said he could ordain. After being told he could ordain, he ordained first and received the pure precepts. Later 500 princes came to where the Buddha was, and they also ordained. After they ordained, the Buddha said, "You should arrange yourselves by your ordination seniority. Those who ordained first should be bowed down to." Then when those princes were about to bow, they realized their former servant had already become a senior bhikshu. At that time they were quite displeased. They felt, why? In the past his caste was so low and his status so inferior, but today we have to bow down to him. They really couldn't accept it. Later the Buddha reprimanded them, saying, "In my teachings caste is not important and status is not important. Only the seniority and precepts is important." Thus he shattered their arrogance. So for Upāli, it seems his caste was considered quite low. He belonged to an untouchable caste, considered quite lowly. In some commentaries earlier on it is consistently interpreted as Chona, but later on it seems to become Upāli. But regarding this, perhaps you could look into it further. I might not have the time to sift through extensive stories of the Buddha's disciples. It is not certain whether this is Chona. If that scenario stands, it would be a bit difficult to interpret. His meaning here is that, at that time, regarding the Buddha, whether it was his 6 years of austerities, subduing wrong paths, or attaining liberation from all worldly outflows of greed, the Buddha instructed me in the precepts that I had received, and I gradually mastered the 3,000 kinds of awe-inspiring deportment with their 80,000 subtle aspects of demeanor. I purified my conduct by following the fundamental precepts and the precautionary regulations. At that time, Upāli said he followed the Buddha's. Having received the Buddha's teachings, he upheld the precepts. And how well did he uphold the precepts? He kept the 3,000 kinds of awe-inspiring deportment and 80,000 subtle aspects, all completely pure. Regarding the 3,000 kinds of awe-inspiring deportment, generally for us bhikshus there are 250 precepts. If we multiply those 250 by the 4 deportments of walking, standing, sitting and lying down, then 250 multiplied by 4 would equal 1,000. This 1,000 is then multiplied by 3 future, past and present. At that time, Upāli upheld them like this in the past, he upholds them like this now, and he did so in the past as well. So to maintain them in this way is also a possible explanation. In some commentaries it is written that the 1,000 deportments, according to the Bodhisattva precepts, the precept of gathering virtuous dharmas, the precept of strict prohibition of wrong conduct, and the precept of benefiting sentient beings by multiplying with these 3 bodhisattva precepts, it becomes 3,000 kinds of awe-inspiring deportment. There is also this explanation. Then regarding the 80,000 subtle actions, take the 3,000 deportments just mentioned and apply the 7 actions of body and speech. For the body, killing, stealing and sexual misconduct. Then for speech, avoiding harsh words, divisive speech, lying and idle chatter. So in total there are 7 precepts for body and speech, 7 natural offenses. So then 3,000 multiplied by 7, then multiply that by 4. By multiplying by 4, greed, hatred, delusion, and equally apportioned afflictions, by multiplying these, in fact the total comes to 84,000 deportments, 84,000 of these subtle precepts. Among these, some are natural offenses, and some are offenses prohibited by the Buddha. Here the fundamental precepts and precautionary regulations. Fundamental precepts are what we often call natural offenses, such as killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, etc. Then offenses prohibited by the Buddha are those offenses the Buddha established and restricted later. So at that time, as we mentioned, Venerable Upāli upheld the entire 3,000 kinds of awe-inspiring deportment and 80,000 subtle actions, all extremely purely. Just as the Venerable Atisha said, his pratimoksha vows were kept very purely. If our pratimoksha vows for a general bhikshu, analyzing from the perspective of body, speech and mind, and breaking it down further by other subtle aspects, there are this many in total. The previous ones were slightly broader, and the latter are the most subtle. In total there are this many precepts that he upheld very purely, because his body was kept pure in this way. My body became still and my mind vanished, so it was that I became an arhat. Because both his body and mind purely upheld the precepts, he became an arhat. His body and mind had no afflictions, no defilements, they were perfectly pure and still. For this reason he became an arhat. Now I am the precept master in the Thus Come One's assembly. He himself verified that I follow the precepts with my mind and with my conduct. Everyone in the assembly sees me as a leader. So at that time within the Thus Come One's teachings, he was the precept master in the assembly. Being the precept master in the assembly means that among the entire Sangha assembly, I should be foremost in holding the precepts. In this way, I should be the benchmark or the best at holding the precepts. In Tibetan it means the best. Actually, it means a paragon of holding precepts, their role model. Just as everyone considers Upāli, everyone learns from him in terms of holding precepts. He was the guiding principle for everyone, their model. And the Buddha himself verified my mind. The mind here should refer to because one uses the body to protect the precepts. When protecting the precepts, the mind that protects them is also very important. If this mind does not protect them, then the body would become like an insentient object, which is impossible. So he verified this mind of mine, following the precepts with my conduct. Because of this reason, I was elevated among the Sangha assembly, elevated as being foremost in upholding the precepts. It can also be said that I attained enlightenment by relying on holding precepts. The Buddha has asked us how we broke through to enlightenment. I learned to govern my conduct until my body was at ease in being governed, and next I gradually learned to govern my mind until my thoughts accorded naturally with what is right. Only then did both my body and my mind gain unobstructed understanding. This is the best method. If the Buddha asks me about my breakthrough, what the cause for Bodhi was, I should first say by governing my conduct, because by focusing on the body, maintaining and protecting it, protecting one's body with proper mindfulness and awareness, then the body achieves a certain ease. For some of us who have been monastics for many years, our body and mind have become very pliable. No matter what environment they are in, they won't have any fear of breaking precepts or fear of defilement. Their own body and mind have already, especially the body, has attained ease. There won't be any jumping around, being noisy, or engaging in various improper behaviors. In terms of deportment, there is none of that. Then gradually this mind that protects the body, this mind that protects the precepts, has achieved mastery, because he relied on perhaps the pratimoksha, which is mostly focused on the body. The deportment of the body and external behavior are highly emphasized. Generally, pratimoksha precepts focus primarily on behavior. The bodhisattva precepts focus on the inner mind. Then the tantric precepts deal with the secrets of the mind. In other words, the mysteries of the mind must be mastered even more. It has these distinctions. So gradually, his mind that protects the precepts had achieved mastery. Then both body and mind gained unobstructed understanding. Ultimately, body and mind, because he attained realization by relying on the precepts, by relying on this mind that protects the body, he attained realization. Mahayana Buddhism is the same. The 6 paramitas are all established in the mind. Therefore, holding precepts is also established in the mind. So in this way, towards the end, his body and mind both achieved mastery, and everything gained unobstructed understanding. For him, that is, for Upāli, holding precepts, or body consciousness, among all the methods of realization, is the best causal condition, the cause for Bodhi. Next is the 17th, which should be Venerable Maudgalyāyana. Maudgalyāyana is, as everyone knows, just as Shariputra is foremost in wisdom, Maudgalyāyana is foremost in spiritual powers. He represents mind consciousness. Among the 6 consciousnesses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind consciousness, he attained realization through mind consciousness. Certainly, to obtain spiritual powers, the mind consciousness is primary. It is not primarily through the eyes, nor primarily through the body. So regarding the earlier case from the story of Upāli, some simply uphold pure precepts while simultaneously recognizing their nature. They don't need anything else. Even without other practices, they attain realization by relying on the precepts. Upāli also didn't say, I meditated for so and so many years, and only then did I attain realization. He didn't say that. He primarily relied on pure precepts, keeping even the most subtle precepts undefiled, and attained enlightenment through this method. Everyone should understand this as well. Great Maudgalyāyana then stood up, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to him respectfully, "Once when I was on the road seeking alms, I met the three Kashyapa brothers, Uruvilva, Gaya, and Nadi, and they proclaimed the thus come one's explanation of the profound principles of causation. Immediately I resolved to become enlightened, and my mind was entirely free of impediment." He spoke like this. This Maudgalyāyana also stood up from his seat, bowed down at the Buddha's feet, and said this to the Buddha, "How did I attain enlightenment in the very beginning?" He directly explained his journey to enlightenment. He was going into the city to seek alms, and on the road by a chance encounter he met the three Kashyapas. They were mentioned before, the three brothers. Shariputra also met them, and Maudgalyāyana met them as well. Actually, these stories are found in the great treatise on the perfection of wisdom. When he encountered them, there were three individuals of the Kashyapa caste. One was named Uruvilva. As for Uruvilva, he had something like a papaya on his body, and he was named because of this. As for Gaya, there is a mountain, Gaya. In a dreamy pilgrimage with my guru 30 years ago, there is Gaya Gori. I wonder if Gaya is written down. There is such a mountain. Back when we went to the Vajra seat in India, we stayed there for the night, just looking at it through the window. We didn't go there in person. Then there's Nadi. Nadi is the name of a river. So some were named after physical characteristics, some were named after the mountain where they lived, and some were named after a nearby river. These are the three Kashyapas. Actually, he says here Gaya Kashyapa, Nadi Kashyapa, and Uruvilva Kashyapa. It goes like this. These three Kashyapas. After these three brothers made contact, they started talking, and they shared the profound teachings spoken by the thus come one. They must have already taken refuge in the Buddha first, or they had already understood some of the Dharma teachings regarding the law of dependent origination. Then while he was talking with them, he immediately resolved. Immediately I resolved. He suddenly, because he attained realization through the mind consciousness. Realizing through the mind consciousness, as soon as they spoke of the law of dependent origination, he might have contemplated in his mind the profound meaning of such dependent origination. During his contemplation, the causes and conditions had matured, so he became enlightened. After enlightenment, he obtained great spiritual powers, especially since he was foremost in spiritual powers. He attained exceptionally great spiritual powers. So this historical account, compared to the history of Venerable Kashyapa discussed earlier in some historical texts, or the history found in some other sutras, there are slight differences. But despite the differences, I actually think that each historical account emphasizes a particular focal point of that time. For example, we previously mentioned the story of their encounter with Bhikshu Ashvajit. At that time it mainly described what Bhikshu Ashvajit's awe-inspiring deportment was like. All of these elements were probably present then, but here, relying on the meaning of the law of dependent origination through mental contemplation, Maudgalyāyana immediately mastered these transcendent spiritual powers. It was likely like this as well. So sometimes we are a bit regarding different historical accounts. Some modern scholars are like this. If there is a difference, they think one must be correct and the other incorrect. For the correct one, they find a whole bunch of reasons. Because of this reason, this one is correct, and say the other is incorrect. Actually, this is very difficult. Even with a person's biography, if someone writes a biography of me while I'm still alive, say two people write a biography for me, but when writing it, perhaps an event that happened to me, as recorded by these two people, their ways of expressing it might not be identical. But even if they are not identical, does it mean one is wrong and the other is right? Not necessarily. So sometimes we need to I don't know if some people here who study history have explored these aspects. Actually, what the world emphasizes most right now is in what year CE it occurred, what someone did during a certain period, whether that period aligns with the reigns of kings in other countries at that time, and what the social background was like back then. They will still go through many books. During the process of reviewing them, they have their own academic theories, but sometimes regarding perhaps some of the things we discuss here, like the inconceivability of karma, the inconceivability of the Buddha's blessings, coupled with the unpredictability of sentient beings' manifestations, and so on. Regarding these principles, they might not have researched them deeply. As a result, merely using worldly valid cognition to determine what is correct and what is incorrect, sometimes their judgments are quite good. But sometimes it's not guaranteed. So here we have understood this, which means he achieved understanding in that way at that time. Later the thus come one kindly accepted me, and then the precept robe suddenly appeared on my body, while my hair and beard all at once fell from me. Now I travel throughout all 10 directions with nothing to impede me. My spiritual powers were revealed and are now esteemed as unsurpassed. So it was that I became an arhat. Since he achieved understanding in that way back then, the thus come one must have begun to bestow the kasaya robe upon him, clothing him in the precept robe. At this time he began to... His beard and hair didn't even need to be shaved, they naturally fell off. This is actually quite nice. Nowadays when we shave our heads we must first do an initial shave, and then for a second time a Dharma master has to shave it for us. Then a third time touching around to feel it. Oh, there's a little bit left here, better shave it again. Maudgalyāyana met these 3 brothers first, and then arrived before the Buddha. When the Buddha put the kasaya robe on him, his hair and beard naturally went whoosh and fell off. Then he traveled throughout the 10 directions, without any hindrance, free of attachment and impediment, extremely, because at that time he should have already attained this realization. Having attained this realization, his spiritual powers, that is, the spiritual powers brought forth by his mind consciousness, were completely fully developed. Thus within Buddhism, he is esteemed as foremost in spiritual powers. Indeed, when some of Maudgalyāyana's spiritual powers are described, they are very hard for us to imagine. Not only the world-honored one, but also thus come ones throughout the 10 directions praise me for the perfect clarity, purity, ease, and fearlessness with which I exercise my spiritual powers. The Buddha has asked how we broke through to enlightenment. I used the method of returning the mind consciousness to its pure source, so that the light of my mind shone forth and revealed the turbid flux within. That flux gradually subsided until it became brilliantly clear. That is the best method. Then he says, not only does the world-honored one praise me as foremost in spiritual powers, but even the thus come ones throughout the 10 directions especially praise the power of my spiritual abilities. Because of this, these states of perfect clarity, luminosity, and purity arise naturally. He is at ease and fearless throughout the entire world. If we had Maudgalyāyana's spiritual powers, we wouldn't be afraid either. We'd fear no one. No matter if it's a wolf, an ashura, or a kinnara, we wouldn't fear anything, right? Because as long as he has exceptionally great spiritual powers, for example, if there's a loud bang 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 knocking on the door, he can turn himself into a tiny breeze and whoosh fly up through the window, then look around, float back and forth in the sky, and then whoosh come back inside. So of course he's fearless, there's nothing more to say. Then at that time, if the Buddha asks about the cause for breaking through to enlightenment, I use the method of returning. Returning to its pure source means his mind consciousness had been transformed into pure wisdom. Returning refers to the original impure. Some commentaries say this is the training in concentration among his precepts, concentration and wisdom. Because his meditative concentration was also very good, his mind consciousness became pure, no longer bound by external objects. This is clear and luminous. The light of my mind shone forth. The light of the mind shining forth mainly refers to the training in wisdom. His wisdom, in other words, this radiance, this wisdom of the mind, this light was also extremely clear and lucid. In this way it was like turbid water very slowly becoming brilliantly clear. His original mind consciousness was transformed into pure wisdom. For him, the mind consciousness was the most important factor for his attainment, because when he attained enlightenment, he only briefly discussed the law of dependent origination. Then from within his mind he developed wisdom and spiritual powers, and subsequently became foremost in spiritual powers. So for him, the mind consciousness is very important. The next one is called ukushma. Ukushma, in Tibetan, it is Letsabwo. Letsabwo is somewhat similar to the name of Vimalakirti, but they probably aren't the same person. He is also called the Fire-Head Vajra. Perhaps he is Mahasthama Prapta or Vajrapani Bodhisattva. Below, we will discuss the 7 primary elements. Previously, we finished discussing the 5 sense organs. We finished the 6 sense objects and the 6 consciousnesses. Then among the Buddha's disciples, he should be the 18th disciple. He attained Buddhahood by relying on the fire element. Originally, our sequence for the 4 elements is earth, water, fire, and wind. But why does the fire element come first here? Fire represents greed. Therefore, to destroy afflictions, one starts with greed and desire. The pratimoksha also starts by tackling greed and desire. For establishment, the earth element is very important. But for destruction, if one begins destruction with the fire element, then all merits have the opportunity to arise. So he says here, Uchushma approached the Buddha, put his palms together, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to him respectfully, I often recall that many long eons ago, I was afflicted with an excess of sexual desire. This part is a bit different from before. Some commentaries say, because he acts as a Dharma protector cannot just sit casually. Like a manager, they frequently stand up. They can't just casually remain seated. Otherwise, they cannot be called a Dharma protector. So it doesn't say he stood up from his cushion. He must have been standing the whole time. Then he went directly before the Thus Come One and put his palms together. This also shows a kind of respect. Originally, as a Dharma protector, he also held some of his own insignia in his hands, Dharma implements or weapons. They have these, but out of profound respect for him, after bowing at the Buddha's feet, he said to the Buddha, I often recall myself. Recall what? Many long eons ago, he became someone with extremely severe greed and desires, afflicted with an excess of sexual desire, very severe greed and desire. He became such a person many long eons ago. Then at that time, there was in the world a Buddha named King of Emptiness who said that a blazing fire grows in people with too much sexual desire. He taught me to observe the flow of hot and cold energies along the bones all through my body. At that time, this Buddha was named the Thus Come One King of Emptiness. Some commentaries state that, in our Lotus Sutra, when speaking of Ananda, wasn't it that this Buddha and Ananda made vows together before the Thus Come One King of Emptiness? In that case, then this Fire-Head Vajra we just mentioned, it's very likely that actually Shakyamuni Buddha and this Fire-Head Vajra were from the same era. That is to say, before the Thus Come One King of Emptiness, they had all generated bodhicitta, and at that time the Thus Come One King of Emptiness specifically targeted his afflictions. So Shakyamuni Buddha and Ananda also making vows and generating bodhicitta there means the two of them should have been together. However, some commentaries seem... I didn't quite understand some of the classical Chinese, but the meaning seems to be that these two, although they were from the same period at that time, as for the Fire-Head Vajra, because of his heavy greed, he still hasn't attained realization now, whereas Shakyamuni Buddha had already attained Buddhahood long ago. Perhaps it also carries this meaning. At that time he had become this The Buddha told him, for people with heavy lust, for those with very severe greed and desire, they become a blazing fire. It transforms into, if, while a person is alive, the fire of their desires burns their own body and mind, then after they die, the fire of their karma will also burn them. So generally speaking, people with heavy greed and desires are also frequently using fire to burn themselves in this life. Perhaps the root of all afflictions is greed and desire. If greed and desire are relatively severe, hatred can also arise, jealousy can also arise. Then other afflictions like arrogance and various others will also follow and arise in succession. So why did the Buddha first target greed and desire? We often speak of greed, hatred, and delusion. With these three, he first had to treat greed, then treat hatred, and then treat delusion. Delusion is more subtle. If the first two can be remedied first, the other afflictions are easier. So he says here, at that time the Buddha told him that greed burns oneself, and moreover, after death, one will fall into the realms of hells and hungry ghosts, to experience suffering. So he taught him at that time to comprehensively observe, similar to our meditation on impurity, to take all the limbs and bones of our human body, the 100 joints of the limbs, all throughout the different parts of the body, the 100 major bones and the 4 limbs, and observe them all as cold energy and hot energy. This is like a transformative observation, warm when it's cold and cold when it's warm. It is a method of practicing the skeleton meditation. At that time, throughout his entire body, he used these energies to observe his mind. Then, during the process of observation, he said, a spiritual light became focused within me and transformed my excessive desire into the fire of wisdom. During the process of observation, when observing inwardly, observing the luminosity of his own mind, what exactly is the essence of his greed? Or, while he was practicing the skeleton meditation, in the midst of this skeleton meditation, with its various warm energies and hot energies, at that time if the mind observes inwardly again, then all the original mind of lust dissolves. All these minds of greed and desire, just like transforming consciousness into wisdom, ultimately turn into the fire of wisdom. How did he attain enlightenment at that time? For him, fire was very important. When he was observing inwardly, because of this fire of wisdom, the original fire of greed, very gradually transformed into the fire of wisdom. Actually, we sentient beings in the desire realm are also very pitiful. For many people, whether it is obvious or not, the fire of greed constantly burns. For the majority of monastics, they are relatively well off. Otherwise, at the very beginning, one might not be able to let go of everything, including relying on one's physical appearance and awe-inspiring deportment. Many aspects are helpful in counteracting greed and desire, but generally for sentient beings in the desire realm, the hardest to cure is greed and desire. If this fire of greed is transformed into the fire of wisdom, like Uchushma, that is exceptionally good. When he finally attained enlightenment by observing greed through various methods of practice, in the end it all transformed into the fire of wisdom. Since then, all the Buddhas I have served have given me the name Fire-Head. So it was that I became an arhat on the strength of the blazing fire samadhi. So since his visualization was successful, his practice was successful, this kind of practice of his, some people practice and end up developing hatred and suffering, and then they make malicious vows and leave. But he was different. When he was practicing visualization at that time, indeed sometimes when we look at these realized beings, we rejoice very much. After this kind of visualization practice, the Buddhas also knew that his practice was successful. Since that time, when these Buddhas frequently called out to him, they called him Fire-Head. Speaking of Fire-Head, when I was little they used to call me Red-Head, the red-headed kid. I was very angry. I don't know why. At that time when I was little my hair was quite red. Every time I went to attend a meeting, I worried that some people would talk about me again. My father was called Upāli, right? Has the red-headed kid from Upāli's family arrived? Some people would tease me on purpose. At those times I felt very embarrassed and I didn't even dare to lift my head. It was like that. As for Fire-Head, it sounds like a bad nickname, but for him it became regarding Fire-Head because his practice was very successful, using fire to burn away the afflictions in his mind stream, and then with this strength of the blazing fire samadhi, he became an arhat. For him, fire was very important. Every time he saw fire, he probably felt a sense of familiarity. For people whose greed and desire are relatively strong, if they cannot transform it into the fire of wisdom, anyway, this greed and desire, if it painfully burns oneself in this life, and in the next life burns one in the 3 lower realms, then perhaps seeing fire would make them a bit afraid. People with heavy greed. At that time I made a great vow that whenever someone is about to become a Buddha, I will serve as a spiritual warrior and will come to subdue that person's demons and adversaries. He said that at that time he made a great Mahayana vow that after all Buddhas attain Buddhahood, when all the Buddhas attain Buddhahood, I will become a great spiritual warrior, becoming a Vajra holder with blazing fire on his head, something like that. Some commentaries mention that there was a king who had 1,000 sons. These 1,000 sons they made vows by drawing lots, as it were, on which Buddha they would become. Later, Shakyamuni Buddha became the 4th Buddha. For all the Buddhas, up to the final Buddha Ruchika, it was like this. This king also had another consort. She had 2 sons, and these 2 sons made vows that when the others attained Buddhahood, one would protect the Dharma and the other would request the turning of the Dharma wheel. Ultimately they became Shakra and Vajrapani Bodhisattva. Some cite this short story from within. It should be mentioned in the Sutra of the application of mindfulness of the true Dharma. As mentioned just now, when all Buddhas attain the path, all 1,000 Buddhas, the Buddhas of the fortunate eon, when the Buddhas of the fortunate eon appear in the world, I vow to act as a Dharma protector and personally subdue the hosts of demons. The Buddha has asked us how we broke through to enlightenment. I closely observed the places of warmth in my body until they became unobstructed and there could be free movement through them. A magnificent light blazed forth in my mind and lit the way to supreme enlightenment. This then is the best method. He said, if the Buddha asks me what this method of perfect breakthrough is, after I used my own wisdom to closely observe this warm sensation of body and mind, because for him warmth was very important. Actually, for everyone, it should be that perhaps attaining Buddhahood, or attaining certain realizations, or experiencing a transformation in life. Sometimes it might be due to a book, sometimes it might be a spiritual friend, sometimes it might be a single Dharma assembly, sometimes it might be a single encounter. Because of this, one's life is transformed. Of course, enlightenment is the best, but even if one doesn't attain enlightenment, there are many turning points in life. Speaking of the causes and conditions for these turning points, they are very important in a person's life. Moreover, we should engrave such people and things in our hearts and have a sense of gratitude towards them. For instance, in the very beginning, who brought you into Buddhism? What kind of coincidence was it at that time? It might seem like a coincidence, purely accidental, but actually it's not a coincidence. It is a very real, natural unfolding of causes and conditions. So it's such causes and conditions that let you encounter the true Dharma, or a book that transformed your life, or transformed your views. This is very important. So for these realized beings, of course, among the various primary elements, the 7 elements, the fire element among the 7 elements, for him, this warm sensation of body and mind, this warm sensation circulating unobstructedly through the body, because during his visualization process, this warm energy, So when we turn on the heating in the winter, let's see if by turning the heating up really, really high, suddenly, bam, one attains realization. It's a bit cold in winter, so let's see, for each of us as well. Just joking, don't turn it up too high, otherwise, what if a fire breaks out? Then you'll be enlightened in a different way. At that point you wouldn't be able to stay even if you wanted to. So regarding fire hazards, we still need to be careful. Nowadays many electrical circuits have been replaced, so there shouldn't be major problems. In the past during winter we mainly bought yak dung. Now it seems in the garden you basically can't even see people selling yak dung. You can't even see yaks. I don't know how it is. The other day when I went to the county town, I asked, do these yaks still produce dung nowadays? We can't see any of it in our gar. They said yes, there is, but over on the side of the lamas and jomos, some of the younger ones simply don't burn yak dung anymore. Not burning yak dung is also fine, if they can afford the electricity bill, right? That works too, as long as one relies on relative warmth to attain enlightenment, it's fine. Until they became unobstructed, and there could be free movement through them, a magnificent light blazed forth in my mind. He gave rise to a relatively great fire of wisdom, and lit the way to supreme enlightenment. I am not sure exactly what kind of state the Fire-Head Vajra realized. It should be higher than that of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. It is a kind of supreme enlightenment. For him, the fire element was the foremost among all the methods of enlightenment. Foremost also means it is extremely important. Next, let's discuss another one. Today's content is relatively simple. The following should be the 19th disciple who attained realization by relying on the earth element. His name is Dharaṃdhara Bodhisattva. Actually, the figures appearing here, when we first started discussing which bodhisattvas and which arhats were present, these figures were all included among them. Now that each of us knows who the Fire-Head Vajra is and who Dharaṃdhara Bodhisattva is, when we go back and read the content in the first volume, we should know, oh, this is how he attained realization. His role is like this. It's like acting in a movie. At the very beginning of the movie there might just be a simple introduction of the characters as they appear, just something simple like that. Dharaṃdhara then stood up, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to him respectfully, I recall that in the past, when the thus come one universal light appeared in the world, I was a bhikshu who used to wait at thoroughfares, at ferries or on dangerous sections of the road. When the road was impassable and could damage carts or harm horses, I would level it. He was a volunteer worker. He was outside sweeping the ground every day, and he didn't read or engage in listening and contemplating the Dharma. I used to worry that our volunteer workers wouldn't attain enlightenment. After reading this afternoon, I felt very joyful in my heart. I thought it's not absolutely necessary to engage in listening and contemplating. Being in charge of construction projects, managing roads or building roads every day, we have a very large group of people doing this here. Every year I would get quite worried thinking, oh my, what if they don't properly listen to and contemplate the teachings? Now I am no longer worried. If they don't attain enlightenment in the future, then those who listen and contemplate won't attain enlightenment either. For some, if they listen, contemplate and do retreat practice every day, when they finish their retreat, their anger and hatred are incredibly huge. If one is truly practicing well, then being on the construction site every day is fine. Some of our Dharma friends are actually quite all right. Every day they hold something and tell the workers, hey, lower it a bit, lower it a bit. Some say, you can't do it like this, that's not allowed. Some say, hey, this won't work. Why are you doing it this way? Some of the female practitioners are also quite fierce, so they are in charge of construction every day. Then here he stood up from his cushion, bowed at the Buddha's feet, and said to the Buddha, in the past, during the time of the Thus Come One Universal Light, the Thus Come One Universal Light is one of the 53 Buddhas. There is a Buddha named the Thus Come One Universal Light. We often prostrate to him. The Thus Come One Universal Light. When he appeared in the world, Dharaṃdhara Bodhisattva, whom we just mentioned, was a bhikshu. He often went to important intersections, crossroads or riverbanks, ferries, riverbanks, and intersections. Also dangerous sections of the road between the fields and the roads that were especially narrow and cramped. Wherever there were potholes or uneven surfaces, such inadequate areas that often caused damage to carts, horses, or people, for such traveling paths, he would go and start leveling them. He leveled them out, because building roads, here it mainly refers to roads, but there are other things as well. For example, including the monks' and nuns' living quarters. Within our gar, some people, including some who do the designing and supervising, including the several Dharma halls we are currently using. Indeed, for several volunteer workers from the demon subduing sector, I also participated, although I didn't stand on the construction site every day. Basically, whether it's the roads here, or even a single flight of stairs, I basically have an impression of it in my mind. A pool, a road, the entire gar is right before my eyes. It should all be like this, built up bit by bit, brick by brick, and tile by tile. So in this way I feel that, regarding their volunteer work at that time, it indeed caused some delay in their listening, contemplating and practicing. But generally speaking, they must have obtained this merit as well. You see, our current conditions for listening, contemplating and practicing are completely different from the situation in the Guard 30 years ago. They are entirely different. 30 years ago indeed, whether it was winter or summer, even when it was raining heavily or hailing, the Dharma teachers and tutors would teach inside, and we would all stay outside the window listening. It was like that when I first arrived. For a period later on, when His Holiness was present, many of the conditions for teaching and studying in the Gar were not that great. So at that time he started building roads, including in relatively narrow places. He started leveling these places. I would build a bridge, or carry sand and earth. I labored like this through the appearance of countless Buddhas in the world. Sometimes I would wait at busy intersections and carry the bundles of those who needed help. I would carry them to their destinations, put them down and leave without asking for payment. He says here that he went to these places and began to level them, and also built some bridges and roads. He also carried sand and earth, carried cement, carried stones, carried wood, carried all sorts of things. Now that we have machines, we can easily excavate the ground. In the past, when excavating the area for our old Dharma hall, every sector and every group was digging. We dug for a long time, but only managed a little bit. Including the roads in our gar at that time, we also excavated them manually. We spent a very long time, but we just couldn't dig it out. It's next to where the monks' parking lot is now. I was also in that area at that time. It was very difficult to dig back then. So at that time, including carrying earth, carrying stones, building roads, building bridges, and so on, with such diligent labor through the appearance of countless Buddhas in the world, he was always like this. Before many Buddhas, not just once or twice, over many lifetimes he engaged in such diligent labor. He was like this before countless Buddhas, also for some sentient beings at busy intersections. Tuan Hui seems to refer to streets or cities, right? In these places where there were many people, densely populated areas, he would often help others carry things. Now you female practitioners also often have someone come to pick up the packages like that, but they are not doing it for free. Here he initially did it for free. Later, during the famine, he also charged a little bit of money. He would do it for them first, and after finishing, he would put these things in the places they needed them. After putting them down, he would leave immediately. He didn't take any payment for his hard work. His service was free. So later on, when the Buddha Vishvabhu appeared in the world, there was a great famine. There was a widespread famine. I became a porter, and regardless of how far I had to carry things, I asked for only 1 coin. If a cart pulled by an ox was mired in the mud, I used my great strength to turn the wheels and relieve the animal's distress. Later, this Buddha, is said to be the last of the 1,000 Buddhas of the past. The past eon is called the glorious eon. The last Buddha in the glorious eon is called Buddha Vishvabhu. He is also seemingly called the all-sovereign Buddha, so at this time an exceptionally great famine occurred. During the famine, he again helped others carry things. At this time, regardless of whether it was near or far, he only took a tiny bit, probably just a tiny bit for his living, for survival. He wouldn't accept a high price. Also, when he frequently saw people, carts or oxen mired in the mud, relying on his great strength, he would often push them out of it and thus relieve their distress. Then once the king of the country invited the Buddha to a vegetarian feast. I waited along his route and leveled the ground for him. The thus come one Vishvabhu placed his hand on the crown of my head and told me, "You should level the ground of your mind. Then the ground throughout the entire world will become level as well." Later, there was a time when the king hosted a vegetarian feast. He went there too. He went and first leveled the uneven parts of the road, and then waited on the level ground, continuously waiting for the Buddha. When the Buddha came out and saw him being so well behaved, he rubbed the crown of his head. After rubbing his crown, he spoke. This is the instruction for his enlightenment. Let's also remember both the Tibetan and Chinese versions. He said, "You should level the ground of your mind. The ground of our mind must be level." Why is it called the ground of the mind? I believe Master Changshui Zixuan said that the mind is the foundation of all things and also the causal condition that nurtures everything. So when the mind is generally referred to as the ground, it means the mind is the foundation of all things and the root that nurtures everything. Therefore, if our mind becomes level, then the world can become level. The world will be entirely level. Don't we say when the mind is pure, the Buddha land is pure? When the mind is level, the land is level, or when the mind is level, the world is level. Indeed it is. If our mind is very level in the exact same state every day, then to that person this world is also very level. Even during times of turmoil for some practitioners, it was as if nothing had happened. Even if they were subjected to struggle sessions every day, afterwards they remained calm and even-tempered, without any afflictions or suffering. But for us, having food, having clothes, whatever the situation, naturally our minds begin to be unlevel. If the mind begins to be unlevel, then the world will definitely be unlevel. The capacities of people, of sentient beings, vary greatly. There certainly are many differences, coupled with all sorts of things. If the mind is level, everything in our world becomes level. Then the ground throughout the entire world will become level as well. Immediately my mind opened, and I saw that my body was in part composed of particles of the primary element earth, and that these particles were not different from the particles of which the world is made. He attained enlightenment right then. What did he realize? He saw that the particles of his own body and the particles of the external world had no difference whatsoever. They all merged into one. The internal particles of the body and the external particles had no difference. Why? I saw that the inherent nature of these particles was such that they could never actually come into contact with each other. Even the particles of which clashing swords are composed do not collide. After all of these become emptiness, the inherent nature of the particles has no mutual contact or collision. Including when we rub our two hands together, it is merely an appearance. In reality, it is empty. There is nothing. In that case, even weapons can bring him neither benefit nor harm. Just like Nagarjuna Bodhisattva back then, after he had realized emptiness, he said, "If you try to cut off my head with a sword, it will be impossible. Long ago, I completely eliminated this karma. However, the only thing is, if you use a blade of kusha grass, if you cut it, there might be a little bit of residual karma left." Also regarding the sixth patriarch, in the end, they used a sword 3 times, but couldn't cut off his head, right? Therefore, when one has mastered this, there is nothing that can harm them. In this way I learned how to be patient when no mental objects arise. So it was that I became an arhat. So within the Dharma nature he realized the patience of non-arising. In this way he achieved the fruition of an arhat. I then resolved to advance through the Bodhisattva stages. I listened to the thus come ones proclaim this wondrous lotus flower, which was the basis for my attaining the Buddha's wisdom and vision. My understanding was verified, and I now serve as a leader in this assembly. He said, from my previous mindset of a Shravaka, today I enter the Bodhisattva stages. I listened to the thus come ones proclaim this wondrous lotus flower. Wondrous lotus flower. Commentaries like the Zhejiang commentary and some others say this refers to the Shurangama Sutra. And some say it refers to certain Dharma gateways of the mind ground, not necessarily the Shurangama Sutra. Because the Shurangama Sutra is generally also called the Great Extensive Wondrous Lotus Flower King Sutra. There is this name. So he says, hearing the Buddha speak this today, it's probably not the Lotus Sutra but rather the Shurangama Sutra here. Regarding the Shurangama Sutra, the Buddha's wisdom and vision, this enlightened viewpoint of the Buddha, my understanding was verified. I could be the first to verify it. What the Buddha says is correct. I verified it like this back then. I attained realization like this back then. So by entirely relying on the Buddha's wisdom and vision among the multitude of the Sangha, he could verify it based on his own practice. So what did he become at that time? He became, it should be the earth element. The earth element became the cause for attaining Buddhahood, like this. The Buddha has asked how we broke through to enlightenment. By attentive contemplation, I realized that the particles of the primary element earth of which my body is composed are no different from the particles of the primary element earth of which the world is partly composed. Fundamentally, they are all the matrix of the thus come one. Their manifestation as particles is an illusion. When they disappeared, my understanding was complete and I entered upon the path to enlightenment. This then is the best method. If the Buddha asks about breaking through to enlightenment, when I observe with wisdom, actually the particles of the body and the particles of the world have no difference at all. They are all a manifestation of the matrix of the thus come one. As for these illusory manifestations of particles, very gradually, when observing through the earth element, actually these particles, the particles of the earth element, completely transform into perfect wisdom. Thus one accomplishes the supreme path. For me, the earth element is the foremost cause for Bodhi, the most important. All right, that concludes today's teaching on the Shurangama Sutra.
Dharaṃdhara Bodhisattva